Hello, I am back. Let's look at this setup. Oh, we've got so much room. There's all this room for activities. I can even expand e-ciggies here. There's more stuff over there. And let's take a look at the fit. Let's do our full first fit check in the new house. And look how I can stand all the way back here. You can get a full body view. And I'm so tiny and so skinny. Artificial intelligence is taking over the world at this point. You really can't go online or even talk about anything in person without mention of AI or what people's opinions are on the subject of its use. And honestly, this is exactly what Moore's Law states would happen. So it's really not surprising in the technology world actually how fast this thing is taking over. I have to think about AI a lot because I'm a professor at a university where I teach engineering students, and considering the fact that these technologies are built most often by engineers and computer scientists, it's not like I can go into a classroom of 18 to 20-year-olds and pretend like it doesn't exist and simply do not use it. Not only that, I am a writer who happens to love the M-dash. So I also have to deal with AI illiterate people, assuming that any M-dash indicates use of AI. I'd like to preface here by saying that I do not use AI to write any of my video scripts. I'm too good a writer for that. But if we take a step back from the AI that we currently know, like ChatGPT or Grok or whatever that stupid thing is called, the concept of artificial intelligence has been around and increasing in what it can do for decades, including in video games. The concept of playing a video game against a CPU is not new to any of us. That, in many cases, is a form of artificial intelligence. So with all the technology we have nowadays and how we can't even tell the difference between AI-generated slop and actual real art, why the do Pokemon Unite bots exist simply to waste our time? Hi, by the way, my name is Husky, and allow me to just emphasize this point. This isn't a video about generative AI, and I will not be stating very aggressive opinions on the subject. Besides, I don't like all of the same things people generally don't like about generative AI. But it's important to go over the concept of what artificial intelligence is and how it's changed so that we can definitively understand the point of this video, which is Unite bots suck, and I could make better ones. Now, you may not know this, but my bachelor's degree was in electrical and computer engineering, where despite my efforts to avoid the subject entirely, I learned a lot about and even did research on the concept of machine learning. Basically, this is the process by which AI is created. You get the machine to accomplish something on its own by taking in data. In fact, one of my final projects in a course I took my junior year was to develop a facial recognition system that does better the more data you feed it. That program I built, by definition, is AI. Even when I was in college, before all this generative AI stuff became the only thing anyone could talk about, we were doing it. Now, I was in college, well, I was an undergrad in college between the old years of 2017 and 2021. But the concept of an enemy AI in gaming was first introduced even before that, even older than me, which means we're about to talk about my favorite person of all time, Alan Turing. Alan Turing and his boyfriend, his colleague, David Champernowne, I believe that's how it's pronounced, actually created a computer algorithm that played chess on its own in 1948. By the way, a huge shout out to this article by Spyscape, which gave me a fantastic starting point for where I wanted to go with this video. Obviously, this is linked below. So Turing and Champernowne's program was actually too complex to run on physical computers at the time. In fact, they built something so far ahead of their time that today's ChatGPT still can't compete with it in terms of its ability to play chess. The Turochamp was able to plan ahead about 3 moves and also make legal moves, which is not what ChatGPT does. It does plan ahead and it does predict, but it doesn't make legal chess moves. The program did indeed lose in the only recorded game that it was ever played, but the chess AI was able to beat humans less than 50 years later. The AI program that beat a world champion in 1997 is still older than I am, so keep that in mind for just how long we have been developing better and better AI. So our timeline starts in the late 1940s to early 1950s with Alan Turing himself, the best person to ever exist, and one of the reasons I suffered through 4 years of electrical and computer engineering. Alan Turing invented the Turing test, which is in simple terms a test to see if humans can tell the difference between a human and an AI. The metric for the Turing test is that if 30% or more of humans cannot tell the difference, that piece of technology passes the test for sentience, for lack of a better term. The Turing test has been a subject of fear for a while, and many attempts have been made to develop AI that passes the test, with a couple controversial claims being made here and there, but the first generally agreed upon pass of the Turing test occurred in 2001. But there were a few loopholes. This program was a chatbot of a young child with English as a second language, where 33% of the judges chosen to evaluate the test couldn't tell that the bot was a bot. When I say loopholes for this, I mean that, in my opinion, something that truly passes the test probably shouldn't need all of that extra background to compensate for the errors that a bot would make. However, it doesn't matter at this point, because we have seen a very definitive official Turing test pass in recent times: ChatGPT. It really does hurt to say it, but as an engineer, I do have to acknowledge how good this thing actually is. It took a couple versions since the original release of ChatGPT for it to be good enough to pass the Turing test, but in a recent March 2025 study, GPT 4.5 was identified as a human 73% of the time. I'm sure we've all heard of people dating AI. I even fell victim to character AI when it first came out. It really does chat like a human, guys. It really does. Alan Turing would be proud that technology has made it this far, though he probably wouldn't love the fact that we're speeding up destruction of the planet. Regardless, R.I.P. Alan Turing, you would have loved Yowie on character AI. In around the 1970s, computer hardware began to catch up to Turing's mind, and with that came arcade games that turned into video games. These early games included very basic programs for humans to play against with fixed difficulty levels, like in Speed Race, or difficulty that increases as time passes, like in Space Invaders. But perhaps the first instance of AI in a video game was with Pac-Man. The reason this is considered AI is because since each of the ghosts have their own programmed paths, it's very easy to assign each of them personalities, making it feel like you're playing against 4 different people. So it's more AI than actual artificial intelligence, but this principle of programming things based on mathematical rules dominated the games in the 1980s. Let's speed run some of this history. Little Computer People in 1985 gave you a new personality for your person each time you restarted the game. Populous in 1989 put the human player as a deity trying to control as many people and land as possible while playing against other AI deities. Halo Combat in 2001 had bot enemies that seemed to use strategy to avoid getting taken out by the player. And Scribblenauts in 2009 is considered to be way ahead of its time because it uses programs very similar to today's large language models. Things kind of took off from there, and I'm sure many of you can think of AI enemies in games, since at this point it's a staple of many gaming experiences. For me, I recall playing Mario Kart Wii as a kid, where it was hard to tell the difference when playing against CPU characters versus my siblings. That brings us to today, where there are so many games with such good AI, like GTA and Red Dead Redemption, and it's only gonna keep getting better. So in a way, it's kind of refreshing that the second you see a bot game in Pokemon Unite, you're well aware that you're not playing against real people. So we know about bots in gaming now. That's cool. Let's talk about Pokemon Unite. We're going to start with how the bots likely work. So the most common way to create an AI program in a MOBA game is through what is called priority lists. Now, if you're unfamiliar with programming, what developers usually do is create individual scripts per action. A script is like a file where the code is written. It's like if you have a folder in your computer for a huge project, and then there are individual folders within that folder for different topics about the project, and then in those folders there are individual Google Docs with more information that detail the very specific aspect of that project. So my example is I have a content creator folder, and in that folder I have more folders for each type of content I make, and then a folder for full-length videos, and then in that folder I have a folder for each of the videos that I make, and then in those folders I have the script that I write out to actually record the videos. Those scripts, very literally, would be like what programmers use as each individual aspect of how a bot is programmed. So at the very end of that tree are these individual files called scripts, each related to one very specific thing that the bot does. So when talking about a priority list, the individual scripts are organized in the order in which the developers have decided that they should take, often divided into short-term actions and long-term actions. To understand this, let's consider a match of Pokemon Unite. A bot speedster Pokemon, like Zeraora, likely has a long-term objective of scoring goals. When nothing else is happening, that scoring goals script is active, and it is programmed to go collect points and then walk toward the nearest goal and attempt to score. When an enemy is close to it, the priority list changes, and suddenly its long-term goal is interrupted by a short-term goal, and it will instead prioritize either attacking the enemy or running away, depending on its health bar. And then there's a bunch more if-then statements for that specific action that the bot has taken. In more recent advanced MOBA AI algorithms, they add to this priority list approach by categorizing the map itself into different zones, mainly safe zones and danger zones. So if Unite has something like this, which I can imagine it probably does have something along these lines, the bots would play differently in the enemy jungle than in their own jungle and have different priorities around objectives, which I'm pretty sure they do. And even more advanced algorithms, which I cannot say I believe Unite has, individual characters are coded to estimate the chances of success of performing a specific action and attempting to estimate the best moves to make based on the specific character's kit. So this version of the Zeraora bot would be able to decide when would be the best to engage or when to use moves based on its most likely chance to secure an objective or secure a KO. The goal of these newer algorithms is to make the game more dynamic and, of course, make it feel as close to a real game with real people as possible. This is really difficult to do because human decision making is so unpredictable, especially in real-time games like MOBAs. You just cannot explain some of the decisions that you see people making. So it's really hard to make a bot play like a person because you can't exactly make bots only make the most optimal decisions because that's not human-like enough. But you can't make it only make suboptimal decisions because that's not realistic either. You can't have the bots be too difficult to beat and you can't have them be a cakewalk. So it's just a lot of programming trying to replicate a human decision that's really difficult to make. Which leads me to my second point. If this is so difficult to do, to make dynamic bots that make sense, why do we even have them? If we're playing a game with real people, why would we have to make these really intense and difficult programs for bots at all? Do we even need them? The answer is yes. There are a lot of reasons for it, but this is a subject that many people are passionate about, often creating posts or blogs about how bots are awful and they'd rather not play with them. But during my research, I found a video I will link below titled Why Games Need Bots by InfoNow, where they made a case for bot relevance in multiplayer games. I narrowed down their video to 2 key points, cutting out points that are generally irrelevant to Pokemon Unite because their video was indeed not about Pokemon Unite. And these were the following. Bots allow players to play games even with poor connection and allow for more accessibility in general. This is really important so that more people can enjoy the game. And also, bots help newer players develop skills to prepare them for playing with and against real people. Now, I put the word new in here because, as I will talk about, after getting into a higher level in the game, playing against bots in Unite doesn't really help further develop any skills. But for new players, introducing them to the game this way without punishing them or anyone else can be really valuable. Another reason that I believe bots are necessary is because Pokemon Unite has a relatively small player base, making it difficult to make matchmaking work. Most players end up getting to master rank pretty easily, so lower ranks tend to be filled with bots because there are way less players down there. And this is a good thing because it makes queue time shorter and allows players to actually play the game. And in the case of the lower ranks, it helps them continue to practice and learn the game before they can upgrade from those ranks. Which leads us to the problem, or should I say problems, with Pokemon Unite's bots. I already talked about how the bots likely work by following priority lists and potentially incident maps, and balancing difficulty is really hard as a programmer, but you'd think that with today's technology and AI and all that fun stuff, we'd have the bots be a little better, right? There have been a few iterations of the bots that have existed, and this hasn't been actually confirmed by the developers or anything. We've just played the game enough to realize that some bots behave differently. I'm gonna call them old gen and new gen bots, where new gen bots are supposedly a higher level of difficulty. Old gen bots are categorized by a few key things. They don't move from base when the game starts, instead they wait a couple seconds. They don't go to objectives. They prioritize scoring. They don't farm anything besides jungle. They pick only very early released characters. They wear hollowware that nobody else wears. There's usually a support wearing potion. The speedster will take jungle whether you're going there or not. When they get below half HP, they will attempt to retreat no matter what. New gen bots are a little more advanced, and though they do most of the same things as the old gen bots, there are a few key differences. They sometimes don't have as much a delay when starting the game, and the bots in your team will go to objectives, but the bots in the enemy team won't go to objectives. And they will respect the lanes that have been called. If you called jungle, they won't go to jungle. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure most of the telltale signs are the same, but let me know if you noticed other differences. Generally, old gen and new gen bots have different levels of difficulty, where if you're forced to play in a bot game, you'll notice that they tend to give you new gen bots if you're in a higher rank, and it's theoretically supposed to be more difficult, but the metrics for it are pretty qualitative, so I haven't really been able to pinpoint exactly what makes it a higher level of difficulty, but I feel like kind of all they do is make new gen bots use their moves a little more consistently and maybe give it some more HP, because it really does feel like those things can be tanky sometimes, but I haven't really confirmed that to be true. If you play in the solo challenge, these bots are probably the highest level of difficulty they have, but they're still not very difficult to beat. And I would say that the offline mode bots are likely the lowest level of difficulty they have, but I may be wrong. The point being, there are different bots programmed slightly differently, whereas if you increase in rank, you theoretically are supposed to play against harder bots. The problem here is that no matter how difficult they try to make the bots, they are still just a waste of time, which is why so many players complain about getting bot games at all, especially in the ranked environment. And since the player base is so small and most of the player base only plays ranked, the casual queue is mainly bots, since there's just not enough people to match games that make any amount of sense. The bot games at higher levels are supposed to act as sort of a cooldown, especially after losing a couple games in a row, where they're trying to give you a free win so that you can de-tilt and get back on track. The problem is that, again, these bots are so far from passing the Turing test. Everyone knows the second they get into a bot game, and the bots don't actually play the game in any way close to the way humans play the game. I've already talked about how it's really difficult to create something that mimics human decision making, especially in a MOBA environment, and you definitely don't want to make bot games too hard because that defeats the purpose. It isn't necessarily a bad thing to know when you're up against bots. The main problem is that they're a waste of time. In my opinion, this wouldn't matter as much if they were programmed in a little more of an advanced way. Plus, even though the master rank queue likely has the most amount of players, we still tend to get bot games there occasionally, which speaks to the player base being small, but it also speaks to Unite not wanting queue times to be too long, so they'll very quickly throw players into bot games after waiting a little while, which has led to many players complaining that bots are being used too much. Though I can explain why bots that aren't programmed very well are overused, matchmaking algorithm lets it be that way. Not enough players in the player base. It doesn't mean that it's an enjoyable experience for many players to be so consistently matched with bots. Why are they so frequent? Why does it seem so easy for a multiplayer game to throw players into a game with bots that Alan Turing would have committed suicide over if he didn't already commit suicide once? Some people would just rather continue on with their losing streak and have the option to turn bot games off entirely, but the game doesn't let you do that. Why not? Here's where I'm throwing on the tinfoil hat and proposing that this might be a result of dead internet theory. I know that usually we can tell exactly when we're getting bots, but I feel like many of us have also gone into a game occasionally, maybe gone halfway through the game and then reevaluated, like, wait, are these bots? When they're actually real people? Or maybe we question it when they actually are bots. For a while, I was checking Unite API to confirm whether I was against bots or not because I just wasn't positive about it. Dead internet theory is a conspiracy theory that states that the internet doesn't consist of real people. And since 2016, the internet has consisted mainly of automatically generated content curated specifically to the algorithm that suits individual human beings, encouraging people to move away from interacting with each other and instead favoring interaction with the bot-generated content as a way to control people. Are people on Twitter saying relatable things, or are bots curated to say things that you find relatable? Now hear me out. With the player base of Pokemon Unite consistently dwindling and forcing players into bot games that we all know suck really bad, what if they're just gatekeeping the really good bots? And in fact, most of our games are bot games that just don't show up as bots. And since we already know exactly what to look for with the horribly programmed bots we expect, who's to say that the entire player base isn't dead and we just don't realize we're playing most games against bots, that the Pokemon Company doesn't have to rely on a large player base to get you to continue spending money? With large language models becoming more and more widespread, it's not reaching too far to assume that as we move forward, we're getting more and more AI-generated content on the internet, and it's hard to tell the difference. Facebook is a disaster since the population of people who use Facebook aren't as internet savvy. So a good chunk of interaction that takes place on Facebook is not person to person, but rather person to bot, which is not actually interaction. I often tell my students that when they're considering using large language generative models to assist them in my class, that they need to consider whether their use of the tool creates any interaction between me and them. If they copy something into ChatGPT and then submit what ChatGPT said, and then I give feedback to ChatGPT's answer, there is no interaction between me and the student. However, if they use ChatGPT to generate a list of ideas for a project they want to do, then they pick one idea, tweak it to what we have available, then they build a prototype of the idea that they tweaked from that AI-generated list. Now my brain is interacting with the student's brain when I give them feedback on that prototype, and we have used the tool to get us to the point of being able to interact in that way. That's not what's happening in Pokemon Unite exactly, because as far as we know, people aren't using ChatGPT to play Pokemon Unite. Actually, before I learned more about like ChatGPT and stuff and understood, how much energy it uses and like all of the reasons why you should limit your use of it as much as possible, I did do one stream where I asked it to generate me builds for Pokemon and Pokemon Unite. And honestly, if people are using ChatGPT for builds in Pokemon Unite, you should stop right now, and I promise your games will get 100% better. But the overarching idea behind dead internet theory is just that. Taking the human interaction out of the picture and catering automatically generated content to the population so that they continue to interact with it and likely spend more money. if we're noticing that our games against people kind of suck because our supports aren't wearing EXP share and our carries are backcapping it right, but bot games also kind of suck because it's a waste of our time, maybe if we had good games, but we didn't know they weren't with real people, we'd enjoy it more, we'd continue to come back, and though the human interaction part is deleted, maybe it would be curated enough to what we want out of a game of Pokemon Unite that we really wouldn't care. And of course, we'd still spend money on the game. I'm not saying that I actually think Pokemon Unite is hiding secret good bots from us and pretending like they're not bots, but I am saying that I wouldn't put it past any multiplayer game to actually go that far if they realize that it might make them money, especially if the dead internet theory holds any merit and we're moving toward an internet with mainly automatically generated content curated directly to what humans want, so that we don't feel the need for human interaction anymore. And honestly, sometimes I really do just play this game and wonder to myself if it's possible that the decisions being made in my games could possibly be real human beings. And maybe I wish they weren't. So that's it for today. Let me know what you think about this video. Maybe it's reaching a little bit for an actual Pokemon Unite related discussion, but it's something I've wanted to cover in general, and it's just something that's in my interest area, being with an engineering background. So let me know your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to hear about what you think of making content like this that's a little more reaching. I would also like to know what you think about my new setup. Let me know what you think, and all the sources are going to be in the source box, and that's going to be it for today. I will see you all next time. Bye!